Good morning. This is Tyler Nagoyo, and we're on Rise and Thrive, Indigenous art, culture, and joyful acts of resistance on USALA Media. Today, I'm here with Cassie Rose Mitchell, who actually just started as communications and development coordinator at We Are the Seeds. So Cassie and I work together. We've worked together over the past couple of years. I'm going to read Cassie's short bio, and then we'll get to chatting. Cassie Rose Mitchell has worked with her tribe focusing on outreach and prevention. She is also versed in marketing communications. Cassie is an environmental advocate and an artist who incorporates her people's ancient indigenous designs with deep meanings into her work. Raising awareness about water and land issues on her indigenous homeland in the Pacific Northwest has been a lifelong priority. She believes that art and awareness go hand in hand because artwork can speak to people across the world and have a lasting impact for generations to come. Thank you so much for being here on last minute, Cassie. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, I'm excited to be here, especially with the current climate in Southern Oregon and Northern California. I think this is a very important conversation that needs to be happening.
Right, and that's why I really wanted to have this conversation with you. It's timely and it's important that it needs to happen now. So if you can introduce yourself and talk a little bit about where you're from, your homelands are, and then we can talk more about what's happening currently.
Okay, well, Waglisi, my name is Cassie. I'm from the Klamath tribes in Oregon. I'm Modoc, Klamath, Pitt River from California, and also Yakima from Washington. So I got a mix a little bit of everything on the West Coast, but more specifically, I've been raised as a Klamath Modoc person. So from the time that I was really young, it's been ingrained in me that water is one of the most important things to us. We've been people of the water. Everything that we do revolves around the water and basically the earth. So I just have been around that my whole life. So that's basically what my focus in life has been. You know.
Yeah. And now you live here in Philadelphia, and we had been talking the past couple of weeks where there have been the fires have had a lot of impact on your land and your community. And so how are they doing now?
They're okay. They're dealing with a lot of air pollution. So I'm sure that you've seen that the certain parts of the West Coast are the most polluted areas, air polluted areas of the world right now because of these fires. The fires more specifically to where I live, was caused by somebody who was camping in a campground that was closed. The campground was closed specifically because it's too dry and they can't trust people to not build fires and whatnot. So I guess these people felt the need or felt entitled enough to camp there anyhow, left their fire without completely putting it out. No. And then they ultimately caused mass destruction to our community. No homes at this point where I live have been lost, but there's whole communities that are completely gone from these wildfires. And I think it's kind of shocking to people that it's not really it didn't get addressed on mainstream media until days after it had happened.
And you're talking about fires on Indigenous land.
Fires on Indigenous land. Mm-hmm. And everybody knows that the resources that Indigenous people have access to, those resources is limited. And then now you can add into all of that, let's add COVID. So now these Indigenous people are being displaced from their homes, their safe place, to go to a shelter where they're being exposed to COVID potentially, Mm-hmm. And they also don't have the same access to healthcare that a lot of people around the United States have because they're on these Indigenous reservations or, it's just a completely different scenario than anywhere else.
Yeah. Yeah. And you're working on social media for seeds, and you've been posting some different photos and information from other Indigenous communities that are affected by the fires. And what have you found were the the consistent messages throughout, in terms of being stewards of the land, and that Indigenous people need to be we need to return the land to Indigenous people to take care of, because this is a
I
result.
guess obviously there was so many years that we were here that we didn't have these issues before. We also didn't have all of these modern luxuries. So it's it's a little bit different because, we were surviving back in the day and it was very basic, but also we've always had respect for the land and for the earth. And that's, I think, where the big gap is that the respect that we have is something that you learn from the time that you're born, and taking care of the land is ingrained in your DNA. It's just something that every Indigenous person that I've met is, that's just who they are and what they do.
Mm-hmm.
So when there's things that could have been, I don't want to say that they could have been prevented, because like I said, the scenario is different, the circumstances are different, but there are things that we know that we've done for millions of years, as far as being stewards of the land and taking care of it, that we definitely could have made this not such a deadly impact that it's had on the land and on the people.
Mm-hmm.
So as far as we've done controlled burns. So we've always done controlled burns on the land to keep the land clean. And until recently, it's been illegal to do those in California. Oregon, I know that they've done controlled burns here and there. I've never seen it be like a big project like it needs to be. So I guess just like the forest and the land needs to be taken care of and cleaned, and respected. And I think that's where the issue is coming in, is that there's no respect for the land and no regard for the things that live on the land, which is technically yourself. You live on the land,
Right.
So do you not respect yourself? Do you not respect your children? You have to, it all comes full circle.
Mm-hmm.
So these things that Native Indigenous people know and that have known their whole lives, they could have probably made a huge difference in the way that these wildfires played out.
Right. Right. And let's talk about water, because you had told me about your dad and his work, and it would be great if you were comfortable sharing a bit of that.
So, so as far as my people go and our tribe, we're in Southern Oregon, and we are right above the California-Oregon border. And below us, there's the Klamath River, and it leads out to the ocean. And the Klamath River has some pretty major dams on it, and there's other rivers that also have these dams on them. Well, these dams have been put in place for the agriculture community so that they can hold water, so then they can use the water when they would like to use it for their crops. The thing that got ripped away from our tribe and our people was our fish. So being people of the water, one of our main subsidies was salmon. There's a giant river, or excuse me, there's a giant lake by my home. It's one of the biggest lakes on the West Coast, and it used to be full of fish, of course, and they fished all the fish out of it, and then they dammed it up, and the salmon were never able to come back there to that area. So my people have been without their access to their ancestral food, one of their main ancestral foods, for over 100 years. So now all of these different things are coming up afterwards. All of these detrimental, I guess, consequences are happening. So in the area of Klamath Falls, you'll see like, well, I guess I should say Klamath County, you'll see random birds that die off in very large numbers. There's another fish that lives in that lake that's called it's a sucker fish, or we call it a chwam, and it's the last fish and the last connection that we have in that water, and it's endangered. And at the rate that the agriculture community is currently using the water at their, I say at their leisure, because that's how it seems to me. It just seems really reckless. That it's scientifically proven that those fish will be extinct within 10 years. And it's hard for our people to just sit back and watch it. Now, on top of it being hard for the people to sit back and watch it, you also have to be in the community with these people that are in agriculture, and they seem to be really hostile towards Native people, which also causes a whole another thing, a lot more animosity for everybody. So the water, ultimately, it's been said that the indigenous people of the area have the senior water rights to that water. So when the wildfires came, we had already made a call on the water so that the water wouldn't be used. So I guess I would say recklessly.
Yeah.
So
how does that work?
So so basically the agriculture community uses so much water for whatever they use it for. They use it for their crops. I think one of the main things that comes out of that area is alfalfa, and then also potatoes, and cattle. Cattle is a really big issue out there. So the cattle and those type of agricultural endeavors, they take a lot of water.
Yeah.
And technically it's a high desert, so it's not the best environment for those types of crops.
Right.
So they say in the winter, when the snow falls, there's so much snow that falls, and then that will determine how much water everybody is able to use that summer for their crop.
Okay. So
if the tribe determines it, and they also have to do it with other people, that has to be like a scientific, a person that says like, oh, there's this much water.
Right.
So it will be okay for the fish, and then they'll use this much. Well, this last winter, they said that they didn't get enough water. So for the snowfall, so they weren't able to use as much water as they wanted to. So what they did was they went and they protested in the main town there, and said that they needed the water more than the fish need the water for their crops and their farms. And ultimately they were given that water because of the current administration decided that was something that I guess was important, for them. I think what's frustrating for the people in the area, the indigenous people, is that we've all had to adapt and we've all had to make changes to our life. Like not even just like a little change, not like, oh, you guys are going to be relocated over here to this area. No, it's like a huge impact, a huge change. Like I said, we don't even have access to our ancestral foods. And these people that are in the agriculture community, they don't care and they don't respect that. And at this point, I think a lot of us have realized that those people in the agriculture community are not going anywhere, and that we know that we have to fight for the fish, for the people, for the things that don't have a voice, the animals, the land, the earth, because if we don't, who will?
Right.
You know, at this point, if we would have let it, the lake itself would be probably almost completely dry. And it wouldn't be the first lake in the area to be completely dry either, because they use these lakes for their crops, and then once they get them cleared out, then they use it for more farmland. So so during this whole wildfire, I guess, what's been going on, crisis, there's a person that's in charge of the levers that lets the water go and lets it flow, or locks it up to where it doesn't flow. Well, apparently this guy made a decision that the water was, he was going to flood some fields because he thought it was going to protect the area. So he's called a water master, and he went and he opened these levers and flooded these fields and affected the water level dramatically. I don't think we won't see the impact of it immediately, and I think that he did it prematurely. I think that it was a reckless decision that he made to do that, and I think that it's going to severely have an effect. It's either going to have an effect on our wildlife locally, or it's going to have an effect on the tribes that live below us, their wildlife, which they're also dealing with wildfires. So similar things have been done in the past when the water has been abused and it's not respected. And when that happens, they get what they want immediately, which is, I guess, common practice with most colonized mindsets, is to be, I guess, just get what you want right away. But the impact that it has,
the long-term impact
is life or death for some things and also some people.
Right. I mean, we're seeing that all play out right now, and we're all, I mean, the whole world is impacted. Yeah. Anyway, we're going to take a break. There's so much more to talk about. Thank you so much for sharing, Cassie. This is Tylena Goya on Rise and Thrive at USALA Media. Stay tuned. We'll be back.
I was in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean when it happened. There was a sudden jolt and our submarine crashed on the seafloor. We were in total darkness.
That's Dr. Dejana Figueroa, a marine biologist and STEM teacher, talking about a deep sea dive she'll never forget.
It's funny, when I was a kid, I was afraid of the ocean, and there I was, 2 miles below the surface. But as a scientist, you prepare for that. Using our training and a little creativity, we fixed the sub and finished our experiments. The dive was just too important. Every dive gives us glimpses at things few people ever get to see. Glowing creatures, fiery undersea volcanoes. When we got back to the surface, I kissed the ground and called my mom, of course. But you know what? I wouldn't trade that dive for anything.
Dr. Figueroa uses her passion for STEM to discover new things and make the world a better place. She can STEM, so can you. Check out She Can STEM for more stories and inspiration. A message from the Ad Council.
And we're back. This is Tylena Goya on Rise and Thrive. I'm here with Cassie Rose Mitchell and her little one, and we're talking about Cassie's homelands in lower, what is now called Oregon, and the impact of the fires, and about taking care of the water and the land. So I was just wondering, Cassie, if you wanted to talk about, there was a documentary you had mentioned that your dad was working on.
He did. When
And
I
it was-
was, sorry, when I was younger, there was a similar, there wasn't necessarily a crisis at hand in our eyes. So this water that just recently got released, they used the wildfires as an excuse to do that. So this was a little bit different situation. They basically, the agriculture community just wanted water for their crops. And they didn't feel that they were getting enough water. So they stormed the main valve, the main canal, and they went and they broke into it.
And when was this?
This was in, I believe, about 2000.
Okay.
About that time.
If you need to take a break at any time, just go for it. Yeah.
Just real quick. These guys are having a...
Cassie's multitasking as us mothers do. And so I'm really excited to be, so she's just making sure her kids are happy.
They, they didn't have nothing to do with me all morning.
Right, of course.
I mean, what's wrong? Can I do this? Okay, it's all right. Okay, I don't know what you're talking about.
I know, that's so true, that they don't have any care if you're there. And then the minute you get on the phone or something, they're ready.
Like, I'll literally just be sitting here and they don't want anything to do with me. And then as soon as I start doing something else.
Yeah.
So they look like they're going to get ready to they're like, we're going to start a fight with each other now.
All right, we're here.
Okay, so
figure it out.
We'll see how long this lasts.
Yeah.
So they decided to storm this main area of where the water was basically kept, and then they broke into it illegally, opened up the valve, and let all of this water flow.
Wow.
Yeah, and no repercussions.
Wow.
Nobody got arrested.
So ugly.
Nobody was reprimanded.
It's
there was
unbelievable.
nothing.
It is very believable, actually. But
if you were in the area that I'm from, you would see exactly why that happened. So, and that was the first time that our tribe had really basically made a stand and said, no, you're not going to use all of this water. And the main reason that we didn't want them to use all of that water was because it was going to start to affect the tribes below us in a negative way. We know that they need so much water for their salmon. Now, luckily, those tribes still have access to their salmon, and it is a main resource for them, And so, of course, we always need the water where we're at, but more so, everybody needed the water at that point. So, just one sec. Come on. I'm just going to pause real quick.
So this is Thailand. While Cassie's taking a bit of a break.
Okay. So sorry about that.
No problem.
So, of course, immediately they got what they needed and then what they wanted, and they thought that everything was fine. Well, later on, when the salmon started to migrate north like they do to spawn, there wasn't enough water for them to spawn, and the water temperatures were far too warm. and millions of salmon, adult salmon, died. So it was a really sad situation when you see grown Indigenous men on the banks of their ancestral homeland, their fishing and hunting grounds, and they're standing over millions of dead fish crying because of someone's reckless decision that ultimately it benefited those people at that time, and that was it.
Mm-hmm.
And like I said, it all comes back to respect for the land. If you don't respect the land and the water, ultimately you're not respecting your family, because these issues have long-term effects. So fast forward, my dad makes this documentary. It's called Upstream Battle. It kind of went around a little bit. These dams, they have these dams also that block the water from flowing. Like I said earlier, this lake that I live by is a gigantic lake. Well, on top of it being one of the biggest lakes, it's also one of the dirtiest lakes in the United States. So when you have water that you've always had access to, can you go get Dad, please? Can you go get Dad, please? Come on.
I don't. No, I don't want to.
I know. So you have this huge lake that your family, your ancestors have always had access to. This lake at this point in time, with the dams and the level of the lake being so low, like I said, is one of the dirtiest lakes in the United States. It's actually one of the dirtiest lakes in the world.
Wow.
So the land is sick. And when the land is sick, the people are sick. And so they found out during this documentary, they found out that the owner of these dams, which is also causes water to be dirty. Everybody knows that water needs to flow. The owner of the dams was a company in Scotland. So a lot of these tribes, they got together and they went to Scotland, and they said, do you know that these dams are causing these problems? And they didn't know. Well, of course, they felt like they should do something, or that they wanted to do the right thing. They didn't know really what to do. So that company ultimately sold the dams to Warren Buffett.
Wow.
So, of course, Warren Buffett is a crazy rich person. Just, yeah, I can't even wrap my mind around that kind of wealth. The dams have actually, there's been court orders for these dams to come down so that water can flow. And I guess, so technically there would be 5 dams that are causing our lake and our homelands to be so dirty and so sick. 4 of those dams are supposed to be coming out. They were supposed to come out this year. There was a court order for these dams to come out. They keep pushing it back. So I think that that's where this documentary ties in, because it did bring awareness, and people were feeling a little bit of pressure to help the Indigenous people do the right thing, I guess. And what's crazy to me is that it's not necessarily that we're trying to do the right thing. We're just trying to do what we know, and we're just trying to keep the earth healthy.
Yes.
So now nobody really knew about this big salmon die-off until about 5 years after it happened. And it was just ironic that I ended up living in the Bay Area at that time. And at that time, I was in the Bay Area. Since 5 years ago, those adult salmon weren't able to go up and spawn like they were supposed to. Well, now all of these really wealthy people in San Francisco weren't able to get their salmon like we're normally able to. And then that's kind of when it picked up a little bit of momentum to where they're like, oh, okay, well, this is a problem. But I think that's that's where the disconnect is. So it's not a problem right now. People feel like they get what they want right away when they want it without really having to deal with the long-term effect. I think the main issue for a lot of us is that the long-term effect is, well, you know, for a lot of Indigenous people, is going to start to affect our children. And our children are going to be the ones that are going to have to ultimately try to clean up the mess. And that's not something that I'm interested in leaving for my child or my future generations at all. And I guess it comes back to the Indigenous people's way of thinking, is that you should think about 7 generations ahead of you, and how your decision today, whatever you're doing today, is going to affect those generations. And I think that's what's hard for us, is this agriculture community has only been in the area for a little bit over 100 years. So for people that are originally from that area, and they have to sit back and they have to watch their land get, ravaged, basically, and then they don't understand why we're so upset or we're so angry, it's really frustrating. And I'm sure there's countless tribes on the East Coast that can relate.
Yeah, I think for us, it's like a grieving process every single day. Every single time you go outside or you turn on the news, and you just see that it's not the way it was meant to be, and it doesn't have to be this way. It's heartbreaking, and it's hard to separate out from that. And now we're seeing like very extreme effects of it, but I think we carry that with us all the time, regardless. It's in our hearts, and we're always thinking about our kids and their future and what's happening. And you can't help but feel like so out of control, because capitalism is just driving all of it. And that's really just not who we are. So yeah, it's tough. It's tough.
Yeah.
But it's interesting to watch the rest of the world catch up, well, not the rest of the world, but some of the world catch up, and that it is now a conversation, and that's helpful.
I think that the biggest thing that I want people to understand, when somebody goes, and it seems like such a docile act to go and release water to flood a field. But what I want everybody to understand is that it's literally genocide against Indigenous people first, but then it's genocide against everybody else. Because something like that, to make such a reckless decision, like, of course, you're going to get the result that you want immediately, which his claim was that his result was to protect the land from the wildfires. Well, and
this is the instance in 2000 that you're talking about.
Actually, this is the one that just
happened. Okay.
So in 2000, that was more than just one person. That was a group of agriculture people that just literally stormed the gates and forced it to be open. So, like I said, what I want people to understand is that it's an attack. It's an attack on, because it's benefiting a small group of people. And these attacks, they might not affect you today or tomorrow, but at some point in your life, these decisions affect everybody.
They ripple out.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that for Indigenous people, it's a really hard time right now to have to grapple with, like you've mentioned, the effects of colonialism in the United States, and to have to navigate it. It's constantly changing, and sometimes it doesn't feel like it's changing for the better.
Yeah. Right. No, it doesn't feel like it's changing for the better, but I am happy the conversation is more open than it has been. But yeah, it feels like because we've been home and you're away from your home, and, you know, we've had this conversation, like, what can be done? What can we do? And we're in quarantine and the COVID, and there's just like, it's just being layered and layered on. So it's a lot to grapple with every day. And how do you find that you keep your balance, especially with the kids, and keeping in touch with your family and trying to remain connected? How do you do that?
I think my kids are a big part of that. I think my kids are what keep me grounded to who I am and where I'm from. And the reason that they do that is because I was in a situation where I wanted to make sure that my partner had the same beliefs and morals and values as me, and that our kids, when we raised them, that we would be on the same page. And I was fortunate enough for me and my partner Wesley, for us to find each other. And he's from the same tribe as me, and so it makes things really easy for us, because our main interest at the end of the day, of course, is going to be our people. We're both really invested in what goes on with our people at home, so we're always talking about it. We're always talking about what's going on with them, what they're doing, you know, what is our tribe doing, what kind of direction are they leading. And so, since ultimately all of these things are going to be passed down to our children, I think that for him and I, that we like to fill ourselves with as much knowledge about our people as possible. Now, that since we're not physically there, another thing that has helped us is to learn as much as possible about the tribes that we are on their land. We're in their home. We're in Lenape-Hoking. So I've learned, you know, traditional words. I've learned that most of the things around Philadelphia, these, you know, words that I probably am saying wrong, are actually from that language, from those people. The history is really rich here. And I think that since I'm not at home to physically be there to fight about these issues that need to be changed, one thing that I can do is I can use my voice, which I do all the time, but I can also reach out to the Indigenous people of this community and see what they need and what they're doing, and how can they feel represented in this area. Because going from a area where it's mostly, I was surrounded by Native people, Indigenous people, to coming out here to where they're few and far between, you really got to find them. I want to know, like, how do they feel about all of this, because I want them to know that their voice matters, that this is their land, this is their home. Just because it's occupied by millions of people doesn't change the fact that there's a reason that people wanted to come here. There was abundance here, abundance of water and just everything. So there's a reason that people wanted to be here. And I want to fill myself with all of the knowledge about all of the Indigenous people from everywhere, because all Indigenous people have something different to add to everybody's life. They all have value in some different way.
Yes. And with that, I love that. That's beautiful. We're going to take a break. And when we come back, we'll continue our conversation. This is Tylena Goyo on Rise and Thrive. And I'm with Cassie Rose Mitchell.
The Alzheimer's Association y the Ad Council presentan la historia de Mario y Verónica.
Mario fue pintor más de 30 años. Cuando Mario me dijo que tenía problemas en el trabajo, que se le estaban olvidando las cosas, fue difícil. llegó a la casa un día y me dijeron que pintara el marco del lado por dentro y pinté el lado de afuera. Te quería decir que se me ha olvidado últimamente las cosas en mi trabajo y pues me gustaría ir al doctor porque pienso que tengo algún problema con mi memoria.
Yo le diría a la gente que le diga a su familia lo que está pasando con él y quiero que me apoyen, que me entiendan y que me quieran.
Si algo se nota diferente, podría ser Alzheimer. Es momento de hablarlo. Visita alz.org/nuestras historias para saber más. Un mensaje de the Alzheimer's Association y the Ad Council.
And we're back. This is Tylin on Rise and Thrive on USALA Media. I'm here with Cassie Rose Mitchell. And during the break, we were actually talking about with something that you touched upon earlier, but how racism in the area and trying to live side by side really impacts how your community can go forward and live. And it's not just in the way that, you know, the white people in the area feel entitled to all the land and the water, but also there's just this overt racism where they're attacking people individually. And I'm interested to talk about that a bit more because I think that living, we know this exists, but living in Philadelphia, like you said, there are a lot of Indigenous people here. There's over 13,000 Indigenous people living in the city, but we kind of mix in and we're like a hidden people in a lot of ways. And we make the decision if we want to claim that, okay, we're here today, you know, it's really our decision in a lot of ways. But we're not seeing the overt racism that you would perhaps see at home or experience or feel like if you were to go to a grocery store. And that's not 100% true because I know my husband, when I go out with my husband, he does experience, I see how he's treated. But I just think it's a bit, being in a city that's multicultural, it's a bit different.
I think you're right. I think that when I start talking to people in Philadelphia and they get to know me and then they like, you know, and then they find out that I'm Indigenous and then I get that same response every time. Well, you don't look Indigenous.
Right.
I'm like, oh, okay. All right. You know, I usually, okay. and just leave it at that. But like, my dad, and he kind of reminds me of your husband, Herman, they look Indigenous. They have long hair. They're, you know, dark, and they just have that look. And
or what people expect Indigenous people to look like.
What exactly?
Let's say that because Indigenous people look like a lot of different ways. Look a lot of different ways. Yeah.
Yeah. So what people, the stereotypical. So I understand that because I used to see it all the time when I was younger. Out here, I guess it just seems like everybody is a little bit more focused on their own life, doing their own thing, going about their business. You know, people don't got time to even entertain these ideas or whatever, you know, unless they want to. But where I'm from, more specifically, people got time and people will be openly racist to your face. People will have openly racist propaganda on their businesses. I mean, it's like it was during that time in the early 2000s and before, it was almost like stepping back in time because there was businesses specifically, they wouldn't say like, no natives allowed, but they were very heavy supporters of the agriculture community.
Okay. So they use that.
They would have a sign on their business that said something like they served suckerfish sandwich, which obviously they didn't because it was an endangered species, but it was more of like, don't come here, you know, because you're not going to get served any kind of service that you would want. And what was ironic about it, and what still is ironic about it, is that in the area, we do have some natives that are in the agriculture community. There's Indigenous ranchers and farmers, just like, I mean, you would expect there to be, right? Like, where did they learn how to farm in the first place?
Right.
So we have people that within our tribe that are ranchers and farmers, and that these decisions about the water also affect them and their families. And of course, that's our concern. They're our first concern is our people. So these younger people in the agriculture community that were native were going to high school, and I mean, I have a cousin who his family they're cattle ranchers, and he lived in a predominantly white community, and he got harassed almost every single day because his tribe was trying to protect their land and their water. And it really molded who he is as a person. He's a really strong person now, and he's a huge asset to our community. So this growing up and then moving for me, when I grew up around all this racism, and then I moved to the Bay Area, which was like a huge culture shock. And I guess that was when I kind of realized that the indigenous people in that area also weren't represented.
Mm-hmm.
I had a hard time finding, just because of where I was at the time, I had a hard time finding indigenous people down there. So a lot of the indigenous people that I came in contact with in that area were not even there. A lot of them were from the surrounding areas, and usually were in town to protest the water issues and the issues with the land and the fish. And I think the other thing that people need to recognize is that the animosity that was created throughout all of these water and the water battles and everything that they've been doing has really had long-term effects on our tribal relationships with the tribes that live below us down the river, because the decisions that we make. So when we make a decision to maybe hold the water back a little bit because we know that it's going to have a negative impact on these fish here, well, ultimately it is going to affect them. And like I said earlier, that's their livelihood. So all of these things that have been set in place have not only have they had effects on us individually and us with our within our community with these ranchers and these farmers, but it's also now it's starting to affect our relationship with our brothers and our sisters, and not in a good way. It becomes negative. And that's a problem for me, because like I said, those are our brothers and our sisters. And now these ideals that were put in place that this lifestyle is beneficial to everybody is not true. It's just not true. So I think that's just where that stands right now. We just have that connection to those people because they've always lived similar to the way that we live. I mean, we're like we're neighbors. So now it's affecting our neighbors and our family. And I guess it's just kind of, like I said, it's kind of like stepping back in time to see. I mean, I guess, and it's kind of been like that recently. Like when I was growing up and people were being openly racist, I knew it wasn't like that in other places because I had traveled with my dad to major cities and just had seen other people, and open racism wasn't prevalent then. Unfortunately, now with our current leadership, I use that term loosely.
Right.
It's really in your face. And so it's almost like what's going on right now in the United States, as far as what people think, like this is right, this is wrong, that, this, whatever, is almost like it's magnified from the community that I grew up in. So I almost feel like I'm used to this.
Wow. That must be interesting for you to watch unfold.
Yeah. I mean, it is interesting. It's scary. I do think that the tribal people need to really start using their voice and using whatever kind of resources they have to protect the land, because like I said, nobody else is going to do it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So
I agree with you there. If people, we're going to wrap up, but if people want to learn more about your tribe in your area or how they can help, where would they go?
So you can go to the Klamath Tribe, the official KlamathTribes.com, their Facebook, and they are always posting links on things that you can do or just things that you can follow to be aware of what's going on. Also, I post stuff on my page, and then I also post stuff to the Seeds page.
Great. So check out We Are the Seeds _art, and Cassie posts there. And you are what's your handle?
On Facebook is just Cassie Rose Mitchell.
Is that your public one? Do you have a public one?
No.
Okay. So don't go to Cassie's page.
You can, because if I put up a link for I make it public.
Okay.
So
if it's for public consumption. Yeah. Okay. All right. So go to Cassie's page.
Maybe I need one.
It sounds like you do. You carry a lot of knowledge, and it's really important, I think, that people hear you and what you have to say. So think about that.
Yeah. I mean, I guess what the main goal out of all of this is to heal the land.
Right.
Because it needs healed. Look at what's going on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think you should make that page. Thank you, Cassie, so much for taking the time and coming in at the last minute to make this happen. And thank you to Wes and your beautiful children for doing this with us too. I really appreciate everything that you said and all the knowledge you brought to us today. So
thank you. I appreciate you. I appreciate the Seeds. I'm just so happy that I met you.
Same here. Yes. Yeah. That's another story we should tell one day, how we met. Right. Yeah. Yes. So thanks for joining us today. This is Tylena Goya on Rise and Thrive. Join us next Thursday and we'll see you then. Have a great day, everybody. Bye.